All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are starting a new chapter. What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a time period known as the era of reform. And when we talk about reform, we're talking about change. Okay, so this is when a lot of change, particularly in thinking in institutions throughout the United States, were questioned. So let's take a look here at what kind of changes and the people involved were. So what we've got here is a timeline of a time period known, basically nicknamed revival and reform. So revival is, to bring something alive again and make it new again. So our time periods here we're looking at are between 1800 and 1850, so really the first half of the 19th century. And then we'll take a closer look here at a time period known as the Second Great Awakening. Okay, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about in this chapter is what exactly was this Second Great Awakening and what did it mean for American society. So what we've got here, this is a time period of a revival of religious feeling that really swept across the country from in the 1820s and the 1830s. Okay, so that just simply means that people were really, really passionate about their religion and their beliefs. One of the people that really spearheaded this revival, or at least was very effective in this revival, was a guy named Charles Finney. He was a preacher, and what his preaching did was it actively questioned the institution of slavery, being that was, unbiblical. So his preaching actually inspired a lot of people to start actively opposing slavery and really questioning that institution from a personal standpoint and from a religious standpoint. A couple dates you want to know, and a couple of names. In 1831, a guy named William Lloyd Garrison, he publishes a newspaper called The Liberator, and this was actually in Massachusetts that he printed this newspaper, and it was an abolitionist newspaper. And abolition is a word that you're going to want to understand what it meant to be an abolitionist. So ultimately, what the Liberator was about and what William Lloyd Garrison believed was that slavery should no longer exist. It should be abolished. So 1831, William Lloyd Garrison publishes the Liberator. In 1833, the Anti-Slavery Society is established. So again, I think that speaks for itself. This is a time period when people really began questioning slavery and really, starting to actively speak out and fight against slavery. And then here we are in 1845. A former slave named Frederick Douglass publishes his autobiography. So essentially, this is his story of being a slave and then eventually becoming a free man. So a name again that you'll want to remember. So here we have again Frederick Douglass as a younger individual. He starts his own newspaper similar to the Liberator. His newspaper was called the North Star, and when we think about the North Star, that was the way that a lot of slaves were guided from the South to the North and essentially escaped to get their freedom. So he named his newspaper the North Star. So here we have a newspaper speaking out against slavery. So there you have, gives you an idea. Take a look at some of those dates, an era known as revival and reform. Now let's talk about some of the people. First guy we talked about, Frederick Douglass, again, an active participant in the anti-slave movement, a former slave himself, essentially bought his way to freedom. One of the main assets that he had for himself was that he was able to read and write. And then he becomes a huge opponent of slavery and speaks out against it and becomes one of the leaders in the movement. We've got a guy named Horace Mann. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and another thing that people started seeing were that there were some issues with our educational system, and Horace Mann was a guy that saw some of the problems. So the things that he saw he saw kind of a failure of the education system to be effective. Basically, schools during this time period were set up for young white boys. Okay, so he saw some problems with, one classroom schools, overcrowded schools, all the grades are together, one teacher for way too many kids, and he saw some problems with that. Another person that we'll talk about is a lady named Dorothea Dix. Her reform movement was based on the reform of institutions, prisons, and jails. Okay, so she went into one of these prisons, and what she saw moved her enough to start a revolution and reform or change the jail and prison institutions throughout the United States. Some of the things that she saw were the treatment of people. People were literally put in cages. People were forced to work. People were literally chained against walls. And one of the other things that she saw were those people that were mentally ill were essentially treated as animals. And she had a serious problem with this. In her eyes, what she decided to do was to change that and really lobby to have laws to treat people better that have been institutionalized or put into jail. So there we have, ladies and gentlemen, a time period known as the era of reform. Take a look at it, listen to it, rewind it, do what you need to do to know some of the main dates and some of the people and what they did. Okay? Thank you.